Thank you for joining us on this episode of Let's Unpack That. And this episode is brought to us by whatever the heck it is that I bought at the alcohol store today. It's pink. It has a woodchuck on it. I'm hoping it's good. This is going to be fueling me for the next few episodes. So,
goodness.
Cheers, everybody. And again, this episode is going to be chapters 1 and 2 of The Hunger Games. And if you've never heard of The Hunger Games, I can't help you. I don't know how you haven't. Just kidding. I will tell you. Oh, I forgot to introduce ourselves. I'm Nina.
I'm Lydia.
This is a podcast where we, two college graduates with bachelor's degrees and nothing else to do, except, live. We take books that we read as teenagers, and especially within the middle school era, and we analyze them from socio-political perspectives and, just kind of bitch about things. In any case, Hunger Games. It is set in a post-apocalyptic world where North America has fallen and children are forced to fight to the death for fame and glory.
Yes. So this is a young adult dystopian novel, kind of at the start of the big boom of young adult dystopian that we also saw with, Divergent and some of the Cassandra Clare books that you like that I never know what you're talking about. This is that same
that
genre.
One's not post-apocalyptic.
No?
That one's more of a fantasy genre.
Oh, okay.
I think this really brought dystopian YA into the limelight. Like, this was
definitely
one of the first, other than, Lord of the Flies.
Lord of the Flies can go fuck itself. But yeah, it can. Fine. I never read it. But this was it was in an era of a growing trend of teenage girl saves the world books.
And she's pretty and different and smart, and that is how she will save the world.
Yes. Except Katniss isn't necessarily pretty.
Wow. Just throw Jennifer Lawrence under the bus.
Oh, Jennifer Lawrence is not the quota for what Katniss is. A lot of people have complained about the casting, especially to do with the fact that Katniss is first described as having olive skin, and Jennifer Lawrence is the whitest white can be. But, she's been through a lot. She's been through near starvation. She's been through grief and probably has PTSD from that grief. I just remember this part in the movie where the Capitol stylist is trying to get her clean and has to scrub her multiple times until she's clean enough to look decent. So yeah, she's not pretty.
Right.
She's not the typical idea of pretty, and that's why she doesn't appeal to people at first.
Right. Well, I think we're about ready to dive in, but before we do that, I do want to plug one thing. We did get a review on our Twilight season from a good friend of mine who said, quote, "This podcast is like I'm a fly on the wall listening to a book club. Thank you. Thank you. That is the intention." And anyway, now we have at least one more listener. How you doing? All right, let's jump into Hunger Games then.
Yeah, let's dive in.
That is going to be the whole thing of this. All right, so chapter 1. And again, so our episodes, if you don't remember, we break down 2 chapters in one episode each time. Sometimes we go a little bit more than that if there's a lot of content to read. So definitely, keep up with us if you want to. You don't have to if you don't want to.
And this is not a spoiler-free podcast. If you are avoiding spoilers for The Hunger Games, we encourage you to read before listening or watch the movies before listening because you will be spoiled.
Indeed.
And anyway, this book has been out for 11 years now.
Has it already been 11 years?
Yeah, copyright 2008 is what my book says.
Oh, God.
Yeah, it feels like it should be 2 or 3 years, doesn't it?
I know.
2008 was more than a decade ago.
Back when we knew how to elect a president.
Oh, right.
Yeah, that's when our man stepped in.
Do you think she was writing this in the wake of Bush?
Maybe.
And the Iraq War and...
I don't know, but we're fucked now. Anyway.
Surely are fucked. Chapter 1, let's go. Tell us what it's about, Nina.
Chapter 1. Let's get away from our own dystopia and into this fictional one.
Yes.
So, chapter 1. This is an introduction to our main character, our narrator, our heroine, our lovely Katniss. We also meet her sister, Prim, their mother, whose name I don't know, and then Gale, who is Katniss's best friend and arguably might be her only friend. They live in what is known as District 12, which is a coal mining district, in the Seam, which is the poorest part of the district. We learn early on that Katniss's dad was killed 5 years ago, before the start of this book, in a mine explosion. And ever since then, she essentially stepped up to take care of the family. So she's the one who puts food on the table and barters for goods and services, takes care of Prim, the main reason for that being that their mother, after losing their father, fell into what we would know as an extremely depressive state and essentially didn't have the strength to take care of her kids. So in chapter 1, Katniss and Gale go hunting and gathering in the woods outside of the district for food and for things to trade for food. They end up going to the Hob and the mayor's house to sell. And we learn how the reaping works in the Hunger Games and how the Tesserae worked. Tesserae?
I say Tesserae.
Tesserae. Got it. So again, the reaping, for those of you who don't know or who may not remember, the reaping is how the quote-unquote champions are chosen for the Hunger Games. It is a boy and a girl from each district. So what is that? 24 children.
24 total.
From the ages of 12 to 18. They are chosen literally from a lottery. Their names are put into a gigantic glass ball and drawn and read aloud. And then they will go to fight to the death in the Hunger Games for fame and glory and blah, 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 blah. Tesserae are part of that whole equation there, and we'll get into it a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And essentially, we jump right into it in chapter 1, because this is Prim's first reaping. Again, because it's from ages 12 to 18, she's finally 12, her name is going to be put in one time. But wouldn't you have it that at the reaping, Prim is the one chosen? Lids, how did you feel reading that for the first time? Do you remember?
I think I already knew that it happened, and so it wasn't really a big shock to me. Rereading it again, it was kind of a shock that it happened at the end of the very first chapter, because this book does start up. It starts you hit the ground running.
Oh, yeah.
Like, all the exposition is crammed into this one chapter in first person present. And by the end of it, it's already the core conflict that we're getting to, which is that Katniss is going to be in the Hunger Games. That speed kind of caught me off guard, but I think it's done in a way that doesn't make it seem like an exposition dump, which is something that a lot of writers fall into when they have to explain a lot about the characters and introduce the world all at once. You fall into the trap of an exposition dump, where you just put it all out there and it isn't all necessary at this moment, but it's just on the page. This one was everything that they did give about the exposition relates to what is going on immediately, which I really liked, and I thought that it worked. It picked up the pace really quickly, but I thought it worked.
Definitely, yeah. I was kind of thinking along the same lines of, oh, okay, we're already in this thing. Which took me off guard. I don't think I've read this book probably since high school. So it's definitely been a long time. And I don't even think I've seen the movie, at least since then either. So a lot of this is coming back to me now as a refresher. So it's been kind of interesting. I
think I saw the first 2 movies in theaters. And of course, I cried when Rue died.
We all did.
Yeah, we all did. Oh, that was painful. Mm-hmm. But I didn't see the final Mockingjay Part 1 and 2. I still haven't seen it.
I still haven't seen Part 2, I don't think. I definitely need to see it.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to watch all the movies over the course of making this podcast.
Well, I already have plans to rewatch them, so it'll be good. At least the first one. So.
Yes.
I remember I hated Jennifer Lawrence for no good reason. I just thought she was the most annoying fucking person on the planet for the longest time. Especially when she fell at the Oscars or something.
Oh,
I was
yeah.
like, oh, for the love of fucking God, can we not with this chick? And I was just I don't know why I was so mean to her. Jennifer, I'm sorry. I take it back. I really, truly do. But I was so done with Jennifer Lawrence. By the time I was 16, I was like, fuck this chick. Like, who gives a shit? I think some of that stemmed from the fact that all the guys that I knew saw her as like this quintessential perfect woman to have, and I just thought she was an idiot, and I was not having it at all. And again, sorry, Jennifer, you don't deserve it.
A lot of guys definitely made a manic pixie dream girl out of her because she was clumsy and open about being clumsy, and so it was that kind of nerdy, clumsy, weird girl vibe.
Mm-hmm. As it turns out, all boys are into the weirdness. And how are we still single?
How? I don't know. But I really liked her as Katniss when I watched those movies. Anyway, back to chapter 1. Wow, we're getting really off track.
Yeah, we are. It's okay. We do talk about the books every so often.
Yeah. So let's talk about government, Nina. Because one of the main questions that I had for you when we determined that we were going to be reading this book was, how do we get from the democracy, quote unquote, that we have today to a dystopia like this with 12 districts and a 13th that is now defunct because they bombed the shit out of it, and a situation where political officials encourage children to fight to the death? How do we get there?
Well, it all starts when we elect a very rich and stupid businessman who has gone into bankruptcy at least a dozen times and put him in the most powerful seat of government in our country.
6
I'm sorry,
times.
what? Wow, hang on. Let's back up. I'm definitely in the wrong place.
Yeah, I think you went down the wrong line to the other dystopia.
The other dystopia, the one we're living in right now.
Yeah.
By the way, fuck you, Trump. Can't wait for you to have a heart attack.
Cool.
Okay.
Cool.
So I think it's the idea of America falling is just so foreign to us because it's not something that we could ever picture happening. Because I'm not saying us as in you and I, but I would say the country in general, we can't imagine the government falling and something else being created in its place because what we've had has quote unquote worked for so long. You know, this has been something that was established by our founding fathers that we've all adhered by. And the idea of anything changing is completely and utterly foreign. But the thing that we have to remember, and this is why I always say that history is one of the most important things that politicians can study and know, is that great governments have fallen. And we are not immune to being the next one. If not the next one, we're not immune to the worst happening. I mean, look at Rome, look at Greece, the British Empire was a huge government and that all fell. The whole colonization fell. It's definitely more possible than I think we like to imagine. But I think what also is interesting is that the big theme that comes with this dystopia within the young adult novels is the idea of a utopia. This country that we're in now in the Hunger Games, Panem, was built to be a utopia. It was meant to be the perfect solution to the horrible things that had happened, you know, the floods and the fires and the fighting and everything that caused the collapse of the government. Panem was supposed to be the thing that fixes it. So one of the things that I started digging into was really looking into what is a utopia and a dystopia. And I actually I took a page out of your book, Lids, and I went to JSTOR.
Yeah.
JSTOR, by the way, you should call Lydia back and give her the job. I'm just saying. So I found a very interesting, it was actually a review of someone else's work. It was a review of a work called Archaeologies of the Future, A Desire Called Utopia and Other Science Fictions. And that was written by Mr. Frederick Jameson. And the article itself that I read was by John Dutta, who actually reviewed part of it. And of course, I didn't read it all in its full length, but I thought it was really interesting. And I did take a couple of points from it that I thought were interesting, and something we should mention at the start of this is that, you know, this idea of a utopia and a dystopia is not new, and we definitely have seen it. But this, I think, really comes into play here. So something that Jameson says is that the genre of sci-fi and utopia and a dystopia does not give us images of the future, but rather defamiliarizes and restructures our experience of our own present, because we cannot imagine the future. So it's a way for us to rebuild our present around us and try to make sense of it in a way, and idealizing how we would deal with problems in the present.
Yeah, kind of recontextualizing everything.
The other thing that I thought was interesting is that Jameson noted that utopia ultimately, and I'm directly quoting here from this article, the utopia is a negative critical principle. And again, to directly quote him, it is not some conceptual nugget that we can extract and store away with a view towards using it as a building block of some future system. Utopia cannot and will not exist. You know, we cannot say this is how things are going to be in 200 years. There are just too many variables. There are just too many things that could happen. And as humans, we are fundamentally flawed. We cannot do it. It's a desire that drives us, but we likely will never reach it. So that's just a happy thought to hold on to it for your podcasting today.
Yay.
It's idealizing the solutions to the present problems and what we would do to fix them. So let's just throw that out there. This is a lot of how the dystopias that we see in young adult fiction come to be, because ultimately all the utopias fail and we get some kind of dystopian universe, i.e. Panem. So politics. Let's talk politics. I say politics, you just scream politics. Thank you. So how
I thought we were going to do it again.
Oh. I was wanting you to do like a really high-pitched scream then.
I have roommates in the house. They're probably already weirded out by me.
Yeah, it's okay. Anyway, Panem. How does a country like Panem get created? I actually tried to Google, how do governments fall?
You're definitely on a CIA watch list now.
Oh, I definitely am. Hello, guys. How are you? Thanks.
Yeah. I think it's worth mentioning at this point, though, that you do have a degree in political science.
I do have a degree in
this is not coming out of our asses.
No, that's true. I didn't do a lot of international politics. I'll put that out there now. I'm mainly focused on United States politics. So my view is going to be inherently limited by what I know about the U.S. government. So that is my downfall. Again, looking into government collapses, I was doing a lot of research on what Panem looks like in general. And I actually ended up finding a couple of cool places. I went on, obviously, the Hunger Game wiki page. There's a Weebly, the 75th Hunger Games, all about Panem. A couple of other places. We'll put them in the episode information. But I was really looking into what Panem looks like and how it's built. Essentially, Panem is a country of high technological growth and high inequality. So long-term prosperity of a country is generally driven by capital accumulation and a solo residual of growth of technology. It's essentially productivity growth with a rising output and a rising capital and labor input. More money coming in, more products coming out. That is how a country continues to grow and to have long-term prosperity. They are continuing with more output and bringing in more labor to make that output. An example of this would be Germany pre-World War II. They had a lot of high technology and a really high amount of capital growth. But when they got the shit beat out of them during World War II, that capital went down, production died, and they entered a very difficult time of regrowth and rebuilding. So you can't have one without the other. You can't have all of this wealth without maintaining this growth of labor, which is just a very boring way of saying there needs to be people doing shit in the country. Panem, growing in the place of the United States government, looking at how does a total governmental restructuring happen? So that can happen in two ways, at least within the United States government. And I'm just basing this based off of where Panem is set. It's set to be in North America. I'm assuming it is after the fall of the United States. So that's what I'm basing all of this off of. Again, a total government restructuring can happen in one of two ways. An amendment to the Constitution, overhauling the system. See Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution, which would take ratification and the consent of both the governing parties and the will of the people, essentially adding a new amendment to the Constitution saying, we're going to no longer have the Constitution, we're going to scrap everything. Or some kind of complete chaos that breaks down the system entirely. And here's what I found interesting. When you look at the map of Panem, it appears that Washington, D.C., which is the current capital of the United States, was swallowed by the rising sea levels. It's very close to the edge of the map there. It's at sea level or right just above sea level. So it was likely swallowed very quickly in what was known as the apocalypse within the Hunger Games, which they allude to in the first couple pages, saying there were rising sea levels and fires and plagues and blah, 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 blah.
Climate change.
If you look at it, it's a shrunken version of the United States, right? So Washington, D.C. got swallowed up. Very sad. But anyway, that I think would be the complete chaos that broke down the system. So based on that map and inferring what I know of the government, a few things may have happened in this case. The rise of the sea level and destruction of the city, our main place of government, was so abrupt that they didn't have any backup plans. Or the government, i.e. Congress, was arguing amongst itself, couldn't come up with a plan, and by then it was too late.
Huh. So
decide
unfamiliar.
What you think likely happened.
So unlikely. Arguing amongst itself? Congress?
Who's fucking heard of that?
Certainly not I. Yikes.
So that's fine. I mean, Panem's doing well, right? Great. No, read the book. Fun fact, I also found out the name Panem is derived from the Latin phrase panem et circumcensus. Totally butchered that, but...
It's Latin. Nobody speaks it anymore.
Well, Mallory does. She definitely took Latin in high school. So I'll get her opinion on it. It's a dead language. So that essentially, panem et circenses roughly translates to a form of entertainment used to distract the public attention from more important matters, which doesn't sound like any of the themes in this book, right? Not at all. Who the hell agreed on that name? I just want to know.
So in this case, the circus is the Hunger Games, and it's meant to distract people from how miserable they are.
Exactly. Or how many problems there are within the government.
Because they don't have time to worry about the government or plan an uprising when you're too worried that your kid might get reaped.
Or you might, die.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, how Panem was created. I'm honestly more on the side of maybe the sea levels rose too quickly for them to take any action in Washington, D.C., because we have NORAD and we have places where the government can go. However, that being said, the capital is definitely placed in what is now Colorado. So who's to say that they didn't all go to NORAD and built the government from there? Because guess what, guys? NORAD does exist. My friend's been arrested on it twice. Yeah, it's
what?
there. So, food for thought.
You have to tell me about that later.
Which part?
Your friend being arrested twice on NORAD property?
Oh, she's fine.
Wait, I might have heard one of these stories. Wait.
I think you did.
Are we talking about...
No.
Okay.
In any case, that's fun. That's how Panem gets created. Chaos and more chaos. So the one thing I noticed reading this book again, Katniss talks like such a guy. She deflects everything, like emotions, just kidding. She totally goes off on a tangent and is like, well, this and this and this, but not because I care or anything like that. It's just because. She gets the deflection award, A+.
Girl needs therapy.
Yes.
And I think, doesn't she get it later in the form of her stylist? He actually talks honestly with her. I don't think she ever has a moment in the series where she's completely honest with anybody and, breaks down in front of anybody.
Not even herself.
No, not even herself. Not even by herself. She never recounts an instance of having a complete breakdown by herself. And I think it's because she has PTSD.
Ooh.
Now, I mentioned this earlier. But, part of the deflection obviously has to be because we're getting through so much exposition in one chapter in such a short amount of time, and we have to get through all the information. But also, it is a part of Katniss's character that she refuses to talk about the things that are traumatic for her, which is why she deflects.
Emotions are for pussies.
No, more emotions are for luckier people who can afford to express their emotions and who can afford to take a break.
Oh, shit.
So I did a little bit of research, and there is a definite connection between poverty and psychological distress, not specifically PTSD, but according to a study, and we've known this a long time, quote, poor children experience greater psychological distress than non-poor children, end quote. And I'll cite that from an article in the description. But it is a psychological stressor to be poor and to be extremely poor. And Katniss she says that she still wakes up screaming after nightmares of her dad exploding in the mines. She's constantly stressed with keeping the family alive and well. And not to mention the neglect she's experienced from her mother since she was 11 years old. Because that was when her mother stopped being a functioning adult, and that's when she started taking care of her mother and taking care of the family.
Right.
And it's a constant stress, and it's something that she never gets a break from. And so that's part of the reason why I think she's always go on to the next subject and on to the next emotion, and never lingering too long on the things that might upset her, because if she lets them upset her, the family starves.
And I think we definitely see more of that in chapter 2 when we kind of get into everything. We learn a little bit more about what she's getting into and what she's been through. Mm-hmm. So definitely seeing a little bit more of that perspective coming right off of essentially having to take over head of the household.
Right. It's a dark situation, and I don't think she wants you to think that.
No, she wants you, she keeps her thoughts hidden from all of us, including the reader. And by doing so, keeps her thoughts hidden from herself. But she really wants everyone to think that she's fine. Like everything is fine. Nothing shakes her. She's got a handle on all of it. The reason I think she doesn't want to get chosen for the Hunger Games, she's standing there in the crowd saying, please don't choose me. Please don't choose me. She's not asking that for herself. She's asking that so she doesn't have to abandon her sister.
And actually, I remember one part of the movie, or maybe it was the book, where she says to Gale, don't let them starve, because she's the breadwinner. She's the one who's taking care of the family, and she knows that at this point that she's probably going to die. And if she doesn't, it'll be some miracle. But in the case that she does die, which is just a fact of life that she has accepted, like all the other facts of life that we see as so unnecessary, like starvation and such a rough life that they have in the seam, she's prepared to accept that as long as her family can be taken care of and can be okay.
Exactly.
And that's not the kind of burden that should ever be on a child.
No, because is she 16 in this?
Yeah. A lot of criticism that I was also hearing about the first movie was that Jennifer Lawrence was like 21 when she was playing a 16-year-old. And we need to confront the fact that even though we have actors in their 20s playing teenagers, the story is about teenagers. It's about high schoolers and middle schoolers fighting each other. It's about a 16-year-old who has taken care of her entire family since she was 11 and who has taken on way more stress and way more of a burden than any child should have to do, and anything we see as a reasonable childhood. And that's just become the new normal for her.
Right. She was 22 when she played Katniss.
Ah, I was close. She was our age. She was my age.
Yeah. And that's not to say that she's not a good actress, because she's a very, very talented actress.
Right.
I think it's just tough because we see these older women who are playing teenage girls, and not only is it inherently sexualizing them, it's also like...
Yeah, it tends to be.
Yeah.
It's also giving us the wrong impression of who is what age. Like, we have 16-year-olds playing 12-year-olds, and 25-year-olds playing 16-year-olds, and 30-year-olds playing 22-year-olds, and we get the wrong idea of how we are supposed to age.
But if you take it too far and use only child actors, you get what is known as Avatar: The Last Airbender, the movie.
That was not the fault of the actors. That was bad writing. And bad everything.
Well, that too. Yeah.
Because you can have very strong child actors who are the age that they're playing. Just think about Harry Potter.
Millie Bobby Brown?
Yeah.
Oh,
and all
God,
of those
what a
kids.
queen. Oh my God, I just had an idea. What about a Hunger Games remake starring Millie Bobby Brown? Oh man.
That would be incredibly sad.
Oh my God, it would be so good.
That could be really good. Who would you have play everybody else then?
Oh God. Okay. Who are child actors that I know right now?
I don't know
let's just throw
any.
all of the Stranger Kids things in. Let's just have them all play every single role. It might be kind of funny. This is just a random idea, having Jennifer Lawrence playing Katniss's mother to Millie Bobby Brown's Katniss.
Oh, that's an interesting one.
Yeah. And then who could play Prim?
I don't know. I don't know any 12-year-olds.
Neither do I.
Like, even the Stranger Kids thing. Whoa, I made the same mistake that you did. You said Stranger Kids things. Even the Stranger Things
Did
kids.
I say that?
Yeah, you did. But even they have grown up.
Fuck. All right.
In front of us. And they're teenagers now.
Noah Schnapp as one of the tributes might be kind of fun, though.
Yeah.
We'll do some research. We'll put together a dream cast. Definitely Millie Bobby Brown as Katniss. I will not fight that. No one else can tell me otherwise.
Cool. All right. Chapter 2. Katniss volunteers as tribute in place of her sister. And she's glad that nobody claps when Effie Trinket, the froofy capital lady, introduces her. Instead, everybody does the 3-finger salute and stays silent.
And the most famous gif of all time was born.
So Peeta Mellark is chosen as the other tribute. And Katniss recalls when he purposely burned bread and threw it to her, saving her and her family from starvation after her dad died. And that gave her enough hope to continue on and to start hunting and using the skills that her dad gave her to feed the family. I thought it was really ironic that Katniss is thinking about starvation and the worst parts of the district at the same time that the mayor is reading the Treaty of Treason, which supposedly establishes it as a utopia. Ugh.
Oh, I have a lot of things to say.
Yeah. So that led me to thinking, how do we reach a point of such serious and consciously perpetrated inequality? And then I realized we're already there.
We're already there, and in this case, it was definitely set up. I have notes.
Yes. So today, we mostly think of starvation happening in other countries, but even in America, people starve to death, and a lot of people live with food insecurity, and children have lunch debt, and all of that stuff. And there's the myth that this is because of overpopulation, because there are too many people in the United States, and that's why we shouldn't let immigrants in. But anybody who tells you that the planet is overpopulated or the country is overpopulated is lying to you. It's not because of a lack of resources that people starve and suffer from food insecurity and extreme poverty. It's because of the uneven distribution of those resources. We already established that, in a way, the Panem is kind of an allegory to today's America. It's in the same place. I don't know. It's the remnants of the U.S. But here's my little allegory that I want to propose for our world today.
Okay.
Panem is a microcosm for the world. So the capital is the United States. We have everything. We want to keep it. And as long as we don't pay attention to what's happening in other countries, we can pretend that everything is fine, that America is the greatest country in the world, and that we have everything together and all the power, and everything will be fine. And America will never fall. The districts, in that case, would be other countries. And District 12, we could maybe see as a developing country that, rather than help it along the way to prosperity, the capital has decided to thoroughly fuck and steal everything from. Side note, why are they still using coal? I thought climate change already fucked them all.
Well, maybe that's the whole point. They know that it's useless, but they're having them do this useless job anyway.
Yeah, and we already know that climate change is going to disproportionately affect poorer communities than non-poor ones. And it's going to disproportionately affect people outside the United States. So the capital continues to exploit the districts for resources because they're far away and they don't have to see the damage that they cause. Just like how in the United States, we don't have to see where our stuff comes from if we don't want to. In the capital, everybody knows about the districts. We all know about sweatshops. They're part of the public consciousness in America, but we don't talk about it. And the way we act like we don't mind it. So that was just my little idea of an allegory for the United States and the world. And it's very grim, and it's a yikes moment if we're bringing those back.
It is a yikes moment. Oh, of course we are.
Kind of converse to the way that for the last chapter you were talking about how we get into this mess. I did a little bit of research about how people get out of these messes, how revolutions start, how people rebel. Because in this scene, we see the people rebelling in the only way they can, through silence and silent defiance rather than going along with it and clapping. Panem is basically a military state. The peacekeepers can kill anyone. They're the only ones with guns. There is no right to protest. So whereas the police today have to limit themselves to rubber bullets and tear gas, peacekeepers can kill. Yeah, sometimes. Ideally, if they're being careful that day.
If it's a white person. What?
Oh, yeah, if it's white people protesting, you'll hardly see any tear gas, if any. So I was wondering how resistance even happens in a state like that when the power is so imbalanced that the proletariat, or whatever you want to call them, have basically no power. And what would it take to overthrow a government like Panem and cause revolution? So, according to Simon Schama, who's a famous professor of history and historian at Columbia University, the French Revolution in 1789 set the modern standard of what a revolution is. And it involves basically harnessing all the resentment of the people and putting it into action.
There a world you want to see. So
I knew we were going to get into Les Mis. Yes.
Do you hear the people sing? All right, go on.
All right. So he said in an NPR interview, quote, "Revolutions thrive on the symbolic and the strategic. They do need symbolic humiliations, but symbolic action won't work unless you have a very strong strategic sense of actually where you can jam up the works of the functioning government." So basically what I think is happening here is that the three-finger gesture is the starting symbol. And we'll see later in the book, it becomes the symbol of power to the people, of resistance, of saying no to the system of the Hunger Games and refusing to do violence that Katniss sees as optional in the Hunger Games and doesn't want to participate in. And as we know from the rest of the series, the gesture compounds into a strategy for Katniss to stay alive in the arena, for her to gain favor with people, and for eventually her not to have to kill Peeta. And that one act of leniency that the Capitol gives her puts a crack in the whole thing, and it weakens the Capitol's whole all-powerful experience because this one girl with a three-finger salute can get them to change the rules. So here we see the start of a very long road to resistance.
Their big mistake.
Yes, their big mistake was letting her and Peeta live.
Speaking of resistance in the Hunger Games, let's get this bread. That is the only true meaning of this phrase. Let's get this bread. So obviously bread plays a few roles in the first chapter, but I really wanted to introduce it here since we have an important introduction, and that is in the form of Peeta Mellark.
Pita bread.
And the bread. Pita bread.
Everybody was making those jokes back in the day. Pita bread. Why is he named Peeta?
Because he's bread. I don't know.
Because he's pita bread.
It almost sounds like the British version of Peter, like pita, pizza pan.
Yeah, almost.
That's what I think. But his bread is more important bread. Get that bread. Let's jump back to, do you remember that phrase I said, the Panem and circuses, the entertainment that's meant to distract?
Yes, I remember that.
So Panem and circuses, it translates almost literally in English to bread and circuses. So Panem means bread in Latin. So the original name of Panem, how we were kind of like, why would anyone agree to this name? This is probably why. Likely the original name was to symbolize coming prosperity, rising from the destruction. Bread for everybody. Unfortunately, we could not have the bread without the circuses. So I want to talk about mosaics. Do you know what a mosaic is, Lydia?
A mosaic is a piece of art that is made by taking a bunch of little broken pieces and making a bigger picture out of them. And so it takes what is broken and turns it into something beautiful.
Mm-hmm. It's also another thing that you could think of is, and I'm probably going to mispronounce this, so I do apologize, but it's called kintsugi. Kintsugi, Kintsugi. And that's the Japanese art form of repairing broken pottery by mending the areas of breakage with lacquer dusted with or mixing in gold powder, silver, or platinum to make it more beautiful again. So let's talk about the tesserae. This is again covered in the first chapter, but mentioning it here. Tesserae are the additional entries into the Hunger Games that a person can submit in exchange for grain and oil for the family. So they can put in an extra tesserae for themselves and get enough grain and oil for themselves. And then they can do that for every member of their family. So essentially, if you need the grain and oil, you're going to want to put your name in more times. This fundamentally divides the poor citizens in the seam versus the wealthier classes in District 12, drawing resentment from those who struggle and have to put their names in more and are therefore more at risk for being killed, versus those who don't have to take the tesserae. Their odds are still in there. Their names are still in that pot, but they're not as many. You know, the odds are literally in their favor. Yeah. And you see this a lot when they meet Madge, the mayor's daughter, in chapter 1, how she goes, oh, well, you know, maybe if I'm going to the Capitol, blah, 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 blah. But her name was only in there maybe, 4 times because she wasn't taking any tesserae. Mm-hmm. This fundamentally divides them. Right? It divides the people within the seam versus the wealthier classes in District 12. Mm-hmm. Also, you make bread with grain. Duh. But here's what I also found out. I wasn't sure where she came up with the name tesserae, so I Googled it. The singular word is tessera, and that is actually a word for the pieces in a mosaic. when I think of it. When I think of a mosaic, I think of this art piece that my dad did for our bathroom when we were living in California. He took a bunch of colored tiles and broke them with a hammer and then pieced them back together and made that kind of a centerpiece in the shower in the master bathroom. It was really pretty. And I remember helping him break those tiles and putting them back together. So when you're looking at a mosaic, often those pieces are, again, broken that have been reassembled. And from far away, it looks like one unified art piece. But upon closer inspection, you find that it is, in fact, fractured and not whole. And the symbolism makes me want to cry. And here's why. One of my favorite quotes of all time is by good old Abraham Lincoln. And he says, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." And he said that quote in 1858 after accepting the Republican Senate nomination for the state of Illinois. What he's getting at is that when you are divided amongst each other, you have no power. Mm-hmm. So this intentional dividing of the poor versus the wealthy is entirely intentional on the part of the government of Panem, of the capital. They are definitely and deliberately plotting for the citizens of Panem to be divided amongst not only district to district, contestants for District 1 versus District 2. So that's their first level of division. They won't unify because they have these things against each other. You know, mm-hmm. District 4 killed District 8, and now, you know, they're going to hold that resentment for each other. But it also brings up the division between the wealth versus poverty within those districts. It's like this internal fissure that's not only within district to district, it's within each district. Because not even each district can be unified. Mm-hmm. You know, it is so intentional. And you might not even think about it beforehand. You know, you might think it's some kind of sad circumstance of maybe the lack of resources, but no, it is entirely intentional, and I'm shooketh. Mm-hmm. That was all I could think about when I'm reading this, because I'm like, wait a minute, this is what they've been planning. This is what they do. They're making it so the people of Panem cannot unite through resentment for one another and resentment among the districts. So they can't come together and unite to fight back. This is a classic example of the government fundamentally keeping the people weak and not mm-hmm. allowing them to grow. And we see that today in Congress and with the political parties. We see it, Democrats versus Republicans, all the time. You know, they cannot unite on a single unifying idea, even though their ideas may not even be that different. It's keeping people in a place of weakness. In Panem, this is through the Tessera, and this is through the Hunger Games. Mm-hmm. Everyone's divided against each other. Yeah. And the big thing is that you can't take a bunch of broken pieces and fit them back together and call it good as new. Even though the mosaic might be beautiful or the kitsungi might be beautiful, it is still not the same as it was before. It is still weak in those places. So back to bread, because let's get this bread. Bread is the unifying symbol within the districts. We definitely see this more later on in the book, but in these 2 chapters, we have 2 prominent examples. In chapter 1, bread is brought to Katniss by Gale, and they eat it together. He gets it from the bakery, and they celebrate, and they eat, and they have their picnic. And it's a warm moment for them. And then, of course, is the all-important bread that Peeta gave to Katniss in the flashback in chapter 2 that she has never forgotten. It unites her and Peeta in a way that she vows on the stage that, you know, she cannot be the one to kill him, or she's going to at least make the effort not to. So bread, Tessera, grain. It's Panem that brings about its own end. Because it cannot stand, because it is divided, because it is fundamentally broken, it brings itself to its own end. Bread ends bread. Boom. There we go. And that is my revelation for today.
As you were talking, I was reminded of the idea of breaking bread together and that being a unifying experience, the breaking bread and sharing bread.
Right.
Where here the Tessera divides, but once you put it together, once you make it into bread and you share that bread, it's powerful and it's unifying.
Couldn't we argue that the fundamental breaking of bread, it's a Christian tradition, for those of you who don't know, breaking the bread, otherwise known as communion or the Eucharist or whatever, breaking of the bread is done in the gospel by Jesus. He breaks bread and says, "This is my body, take it and eat." It is a symbolism of the fact that he knows he's going to die, and he's going to die for the people's sins, for our sins. That's the whole premise of breaking bread. So today, modern Christians will take communion as a way to remember and honor, I guess, the sacrifice that Jesus made But even in the breaking of that bread, you notice that there are so many breaks within Christianity, too. There are so many different sects of Christianity. There's so many divided opinions among Christianity. So even in that,
though, that if it divides, we're missing the core point of the breaking of the bread, because the communion isn't the only time that Jesus breaks bread. He breaks bread with everybody that he eats a meal with, and he eats meals with taxpayers and sex workers and all the outcasts of society, and that the breaking of the bread is the unifying of the people, and that's the whole point of it. The fact that the breaking of the bread can be seen as like a splintering of sects of Christianity is unfortunate, because really we're supposed to break bread to share it, to unify us, and not to divide
everybody.
Us. Mm-hmm.
Right. Anyway, on this week's episode of Nina and Lydia are still jaded at religion as a whole.
Lol. Lol, 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 lol.
Love everybody.
Yeah.
Stop kicking people out of our country. Let people live.
Well, so we're starting off
shit,
with a lot of heavy shit. Yeah. Can I just mention really quickly to lighten the mood, as lightning as this can be? I've now noticed that 2 of my favorite books from this era of my life begin with kittens being drowned.
What's the other one?
The first book in the Protector of the Small series by Tamora Pierce. It starts with kittens being drowned by a giant spider and being eaten.
Hey, don't drown kittens. Kittens are cool.
Don't try and drown kittens. That was the one point where I was like, Katniss, excuse? Yeah. Excuse? No.
Kittens are good. Just
Cat has
ask
a reason
Hannah
to
Shaw.
hate you.
Donate to Orphan Kitten Club.
Save the kittens. Don't drown them because you can't feed them.
And also spay and neuter your pets. Thank you.
Yeah, spay and neuter your pets. I don't think spay and neuter exists in Panem.
I wanted to add one quick thing before we sign off, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So way back in season 1, we talked a little bit about indigenous culture in America. And when we were talking about it, we were talking a lot about the Quileute people and Jacob's people and how they haven't benefited at all from the selling of Twilight and da-da-da-da. Diving way back, if anyone's interested, there's actually an extreme epidemic of indigenous women who go missing and are murdered on a yearly basis. And one of my favorite podcasts, called The Murder Squad, featuring Paul Holes and Billy Jensen, they just did a really fantastic episode on missing and murdered indigenous women. They had a guest come in who spoke about it, and they really kind of did a deep dive into the problem. So if anyone is interested, I highly recommend listening to that podcast and that episode. That came out on September 30th. Listen to that. That's really great. And then I have one other thing here. If you have not heard, or if you don't know me at all, I am a huge crime junkie. That is what I do with my life. I love it. Love it in the way that I can at least be fascinated and want to change the criminal justice system in a way that's going to give justice to families. And one of the biggest things that needs justice for families right now is the case of Alissa Turney and her sister Sarah Turney. If you are listening to this and you don't know the story of Alissa Turney and Sarah Turney, please listen to a podcast either called Missing Alissa, that's like a docu-series, or listen to, again, The Murder Squad, episode 13, where they talk about Alissa's story. There's a petition out right now to get her supposed killer arrested, or at least tried for her murder, because they're pretty certain they know who it is, and the Phoenix police is not doing anything. But if you at all want anything else to listen to, or if you have any questions about it, please listen and look up Alissa Turney. Crime Junkies also did a great one in November of 2018 about Alissa Turney. This is one of these cases that has completely sunk its claws into me. And that's my shameless plug of all of my true crime obsessions for today. Thank you.
Do we need to make you your own true crime podcast, Nina?
I don't know. I don't know. What would I talk about?
Well, all this stuff that you find interesting. Or maybe you could uncover some of the stuff that people don't know about that deserves justice.
It's definitely a thought. We'll see. We'll see. I would love a partner in crime. Ha ha.
Well, if you need an audio producer, I think we've got one on the hook. Are
you throwing Dylan under the bus again?
Yeah. He volunteered for this.
He did volunteer, and we love him for it. We support you, Dylan. Thank you for everything that you do. You are truly one of the squad.
All right, for the closing stuff. Special thanks to Dylan Forehand for being our audio producer for these episodes for the season and making our audio not sound like shit. Thanks a lot. You can follow us on Twitter at Let's Unpack Pod. We are on SoundCloud, Apple Podcast, iTunes, Stitcher. I haven't done this in so long. I think that's all of them. Eventually, I think we're going to have more social media. Nina, Tumblr?
Ha! That's a funny joke.
Never gets old.
Someday. Shout out to my buddy who binged all of season 1. You know who you are. You're fantastic. Thank you so much for validating me and Lydia's work, and I hope you like this one.
And as always, the links to all of our information sources will be in the episode notes. And let's get this bread. Yeah.
Yay.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
that's the end.